Hi, folks. Welcome to another live stream. It's Thursday. We try and do this most Thursdays. Today is a very special Thursday for me because yesterday was my birthday. Yay! My wife and I have the same birthday, as many of you know. We had an awesome day yesterday. But I'll tell you about that maybe in another video. Today, I want to talk about something else, which is um, how many of you out there, let me know in the comments if there's anyone who still thinks this. Is anyone still worried about cholesterol? And by cholesterol, I mean LDL, ApoB, whatever you want to call it, right? Does anyone still think that that is the main cause or the only cause of heart disease, right? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you're still in that camp, and we'll tell you about why I'm no longer in that camp. So the truth is that I used to be in that camp, right? So back in the days when I was vegan and vegetarian, I can remember being quite proud by statements my doctors made that didn't make any sense to me. Now, I mean, they certainly don't make sense to me now. But even at the time, I didn't understand them, but I thought they were good, right? So one doctor I remember telling me, my cholesterol is so low, I'm never going to have a heart attack or something. This was many, many years ago. My cholesterol at that time was, about I don't know, about 100. LDL was maybe about 100. Um, Later on, it started going up. So that was when I was very young. In fact, I think the reason that that came so low is probably because I was smoking. And I think smoking artificially lowers the LDL at that time. So I'm going way back to my early 20s. But later on, my LDL was high. It was always high, even as a vegan and a vegetarian. And I used to think that was, I used to be a little bit concerned, right? I would try and get more purist about my vegetarian diet, about my vegan diet, and so on. And it's not until I spent some time in the library and actually read some books that I began to understand that it's not really so much about it's not about the lipids at all, to be perfectly honest. It's really about sugar. If it's about anything to do with food, there are many causes of heart disease, but today we're going to talk about sugar, right? So, if you know, here's a question for you: how many spoons of sugar are in the human body? Okay, you can Google it if you want. I'll tell you just now. But I'll tell you before I tell you how many teaspoons of sugar should be in the human body, I'll tell you how many teaspoons of sugar the average person eats in the US, which is 17 teaspoons of sugar. All right. Now, that 17 is much higher than what's recommended. What's recommended is 6 spoons of sugar for women and 9 for men, right? In my view, those recommendations are silly. Given that the amount of sugar that should be in the human bloodstream is 1 spoon, 1 teaspoon, and no more. No less either. If there's less, we have problems. But if there's more, we have serious problems. Now, what happens when we have that 6 spoons of sugar or 9 spoons of sugar or 17 spoons of sugar? It has to be put away somewhere. So we have a hormonal response. The hormonal response is mostly through the hormone insulin, although there are other hormones at work too. And that insulin basically is involved in processes which pack that sugar away. Now we have reserves of carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is just complex sugars. So we can store sugar in 2 places in our body. One is the liver, the second is the muscles. But those stores are pretty limited. So what's going to happen once maybe you can store another 2 or 3 spoons in those spaces, depending on the size of your muscle. It really varies a lot from person to person. But what happens after that done is it all has to be translated, it all has to be transformed into fat. And that fat then has to be stored. And unfortunately, where that fat is stored is often in not in subcutaneous fat, but in visceral fat. Visceral fat is the topic of another day. But today I want to talk about, let's say that there's a little bit of, let's say during the period that the insulin is packing that away or translated it and transforming it into fat, what happens to the sugar? The sugar is going to cause something called glycation in the body. Now, all kinds of molecules can get glycated, including the LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, and so on. When that gets glycated, when sugar sticks to that, it becomes, think of it like rust. Something is sticking to an otherwise pristine substance and making that pristine substance more toxic, right? So when sugar sticks to that LDL or many other things, we create something called AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And it's those AGEs, those advanced glycation end products, which can damage all kinds of systems in the body, including the brain system, including the heart system, a lot of things, right? So we want to avoid that. Now, when a lot of us are thinking of sugar, when I'm saying sugar, a lot of you are probably thinking like, I don't eat candy bars, I don't drink soda. That's great that you don't eat candy bars and you don't drink soda, but there's sugar in almost everything, right? I once remember I looked into how much sugar is in oatmeal. It's a whole lot. It's not a small amount, right? Now, some people will say that when you're having it in the form of oats, especially uncut whole oats or whatever it is, rolled oats, it's better because it includes fiber. Maybe it's better, but is it good? I don't think so. Granola bars, yogurts have a lot of hidden sugars, salad dressings. So if you're buying something with a label, first of all, my preference would be that you not buy anything with a label, but that's not always possible. If you're buying something with a label, look into it, find out how many carbohydrates are in it. Carbohydrates are just sugars that are stringed together, right? So think that through a little bit. The second thing to say is that, of course, there's certain foods. I think breads and in my mind oatmeal as well. But let's the grains in general that just they spike blood sugar so much more than everything else, refined grains, right? So what I would say is, if you have space to limit something, reduce something, get something out of your diet, refined grains are sort of top of the list, right? That includes brown bread, that includes your sprouted wheat, includes sourdough, includes all of the stuff, right? So any form of grain, we'd want to get it out of the diet. Now, in the long term, what happens when our sugar levels are chronically in high, chronically elevated? We get something called hyperinsulinemia, right? This is related to something some people call insulin resistance. I don't like that term. I prefer to just use the term hyperinsulinemia because that's just high insulin levels. Now, when you have chronically high insulin levels, that's not good. It means you can never burn fat, right? So something to why can you never burn fat? Because insulin is the policeman or policewoman, if you want to think about it that way, that keeps the fat where it's supposed to be. It doesn't allow the fat to come out of its stores. So if you chronically, even if you may be a big person, maybe you have a lot of fat on your body, but if your insulin is chronically high, you're never going to be able to access that fat to do what it was meant to do, which is to be an energy reserve for you. That energy reserve is only possible when insulin levels are low. Then other hormones, including glucagon, they go higher. And glucagon is what's going to enable you to use those fat stores for what they were made for energy, right? Um, that glycated sugar, so those glycated proteins, I mentioned that they damage arteries, which is true, but they can also damage mitochondria. And that's a serious problem. So mitochondria do many things. One of the things that they do is they give our body energy through the conversion of adenosine diphosphate ADP into adenosine triphosphate ATP. That's how we make energy in our mitochondria. If the mitochondria are damaged because we've been having too much sugar, that's again going to cause us to feel hungry, going to cause us to feel weak, low energy, all kinds of problems. Now, what can we do about this? There are lots of things we can do. The simplest thing, and it sounds simple, but because a lot of this has to do with addiction. By the way, I'm giving a talk on carb addiction, sugar addiction on Sunday. So feel free to join that. You can look for it. I'll be posting more about it on Facebook and other places if you're interested. That's going to be hosted by the low carb group in India. Fantastic folks. I've done a couple of interviews with them. Shashi and Anoop, for those who remember. So what can we do about it? So first of all, we have to identify. So I talked about reading the labels. We have to know where our carbs are coming from. The second thing we can do is try and find a like for like replacement. So if you like salty foods, here in South Africa, for example, we have biltong. Biltong is like a beef jerky kind of thing, salted meat. That's a great replacement for your potato chips, for your pretzels, for anything like that. It will give you the salt and protein that you're craving, right? If you crave something sweet, there's a recipe for custard on my recipe, a carnivore sugar-free custard, which is really tasty. I make it, I'd say at least once a week these days. I used to make it almost every day, but now it's much less than that. The second thing is that if we eat the foods that our body actually wants, if we eat the foods that will actually give our body the nourishment that it needs, then we won't crave these sweet foods, these carb-heavy foods, these carbohydrate-rich foods, right? So what are those foods that the body really needs? Well, in a word, it's meat. That's really what we were designed to eat. We should be eating diets that are very high in meat. So you can have your steaks, you can have chicken, you can have whatever kind of meat you like, and start the meal with that. Even if you don't eat a lot of it. So some people say, no, I can't really stomach too much meat. I don't want them. Eggs would be another. Dairy would be a third choice. Some people say, look, I can't stomach that much meat. I say, okay, maybe you only want a small piece of chicken, whatever it is, but start the meal with that small piece of chicken because you're going to be more satisfied when you have your carbs, when you have your potatoes and rice at the end of the meal. You're not going to have as much, right? Or try and limit that at the least, right? The third thing to do is, we can't keep track of what we don't test. So I would say testing blood sugar is a pretty easy thing to do. It depends where you are, but between $15 and $30, you can buy a simple blood test for your fasting glucose. That's a good measure. It's a good start. If you want to do more comprehensive blood work, that's also a good idea. I have other videos about what tests are a really good idea, what tests are necessary, right? So let me just take a quick look and see if we have any comments here. I'm not worried about cholesterol. I'm worried about carbs and pesticides. I eat hypercarnivore. Good to hear. That is indeed what we recommend. Hypercarnivore, in my book, is a diet that is at least 70% meat. And that is the diet that humans ancestrally are designed to eat. So it's great that you're doing that. I encourage everyone to give it a try. So that's it. Don't stress too much about your cholesterol, folks. Or if you want to stress. I mean, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. But if you're worried because your cholesterol is high and you haven't tested your sugar, you haven't tested your glucose, you haven't tested your A1C, it's time to test those things. And it's time to understand that by far the biggest risk factor for heart disease is someone who develops diabetes. Right? Most diabetics are ultimately die of a heart attack. So that's something to keep in mind. We need to keep those blood sugars low. We need to ideally keep the carbohydrates out of our mouth, to be perfectly honest. But if you can't do that, at least reduce it as much as you can. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next one.